Something just shifted, and if you felt even the slightest pause before clicking away, that wasn't random. You're not here by accident, and this moment isn't as ordinary as it seems. There are times when everything appears quiet on the surface, but behind that silence, something is preparing to reveal itself. And this feels exactly like one of those moments. Heaven is often described as working in timing, not noise. And when a message reaches you right before clarity arrives, it's usually because you're standing at a turning point you didn't fully recognize yet. You may not see it clearly right now, and you may still be holding on to questions about why things unfolded the way they did. But something is about to connect in a way that changes how you understand everything that happened before. This isn't about guessing or forcing meaning. It's about recognizing that there are moments where everything begins to make sense all at once, and those moments don't come without a signal first. So don't rush past this, don't treat it like something you've heard before, and don't assume it doesn't apply to you. Stay with this for just a little longer, because what you're about to realize will explain more than you expect. What you went through wasn't just a series of random setbacks, even though it may have felt exactly like that while you were in it. Things didn't just slowly fade. They broke, they collapsed, they disconnected in ways that didn't make sense at the time. Plans you believed in didn't hold. People you trusted shifted or disappeared, and situations you thought were stable suddenly became uncertain. That kind of breakdown doesn't just affect what's around you. It starts affecting how you think, how you trust, and how you move forward. There were moments where you probably questioned everything, your direction, your decisions, even your own judgment, because when too many things fall apart at once, it creates the illusion that something must be wrong with you. But that wasn't the truth. What you experienced was not failure in the way you thought it was. There's a difference between something failing and something being removed, and what you went through fits more into removal than failure. It didn't feel controlled, it didn't feel planned, and it definitely didn't feel fair. You may have tried to hold things together longer than you should have, hoping that things would return to how they were, hoping that the same connections, the same paths, or the same plans could still work if you just gave it more time. But instead of stabilizing, things continued to shift, sometimes slowly and sometimes all at once. That kind of experience creates emotional exhaustion because you're not just dealing with loss, you're dealing with confusion. You're trying to understand why something that once felt right suddenly no longer fits. And in that confusion, there were moments where everything felt uncertain. You didn't have clear answers, you didn't have a clear path forward, and the usual sense of control you had over your life didn't feel as strong anymore. That's one of the hardest places to be, because it feels like you're in between two versions of your life, one that no longer exists and one that hasn't fully formed yet. That in-between space can feel empty, frustrating, and even isolating at times. It can make you feel like you're stuck without direction, even though something deeper is actually shifting underneath the surface. You may have also noticed how this phase changed the way you see things. It made you more aware of what wasn't working, more aware of who was truly aligned with you and who wasn't, and more aware of patterns that you might have ignored before. That awareness didn't come easily. It came through experience, through disappointment, and through moments where you had to step back and reassess everything. And while that process didn't feel good, it was necessary for something else to take shape. Because without that level of clarity, you would have continued moving in the same direction, holding on to things that were no longer meant to stay. Even though it felt like everything was falling apart, there was a pattern within it. It didn't all collapse at once without meaning. Certain things left before others. Certain situations changed before the full picture became clear. That's because what was happening wasn't random destruction. It was a gradual separation. A separation between what was aligned with where you're going and what was not. And that kind of separation doesn't always feel clean or peaceful. Sometimes it feels chaotic, unexpected, and difficult to accept. The hardest part is that you couldn't see the outcome while it was happening. You were experiencing the breakdown without understanding the purpose behind it. And when you're in that position, it's natural to resist it, to question it, and to try to hold on to what feels familiar. But the more things shifted, the clearer it became that something was changing whether you were ready for it or not. And now, looking at where you stand, you're no longer in the exact same place you were when everything started falling apart. Something has already moved, even if the full picture hasn't been revealed yet. So what felt like everything breaking down was actually creating space. Space that didn't exist before. Space that couldn't exist as long as everything stayed the same. And while that process was uncomfortable and at times overwhelming, it was not meaningless. It was the beginning of a transition, even if it didn't look like one at the time. But here's what you couldn't see while everything was falling apart. There was a purpose forming underneath every loss, every delay, and every moment that didn't make sense. What felt like things being taken away was actually something being cleared, not to leave you empty, but to reposition you in a way that couldn't happen while everything stayed the same. Heaven is often described as operating beyond immediate understanding, meaning that what looks like disruption in the moment can actually be alignment in progress. And that's exactly what was happening in your situation. You weren't being pushed backwards. You were being moved step by step into a space that required those previous connections and situations to fall away first. There are times when things don't break because they are weak, but because they are no longer meant to hold your future. And that distinction is important because it changes how you see everything that happened. What ended, what shifted, what disconnected, it wasn't all taken from you without reason. It was being separated from you because it couldn't continue into the next phase you're moving toward. Even if it once felt right, even if it once made sense, there comes a point where something reaches its limit in your life, and beyond that point, it can no longer support where you're going. That's when change begins, not always gently but necessarily. Even Jesus Christ is often described as speaking about transformation through loss, about how something must be released before something greater can take its place. And while that idea is easy to understand in theory, it feels completely different when you're living through it. Because in real time, it doesn't feel like transformation, it feels like instability. It feels like uncertainty. It feels like things are being taken faster than they are being replaced. But that's because you were in the middle of the process, not at the point where it becomes clear. What was happening was a form of redirection, but not the kind that announces itself clearly. It works quietly through changes that seem unrelated at first. One situation shifts, then another follows. And before you realize it, the entire direction of your life has started to move differently. And while that movement didn't feel intentional at the time, it was actually guiding you away from paths that would not have led where you are meant to go. That's why some things didn't work, no matter how much effort you put in. That's why certain connections didn't stay stable, no matter how much you tried to fix them. Because they were not meant to continue into what's ahead. What makes this moment different now is that you are no longer in the same position you were when everything started breaking apart. You've already moved through the most uncertain part, even if it didn't feel like progress while you were in it. And now, the purpose behind those changes is starting to become more relevant than the loss itself. You may not have the full picture yet, but you are closer to understanding than you were before. And that shift from confusion to awareness is where everything begins to connect. So what you experienced was not meaningless disruption, it was preparation. Preparation that didn't look organized, didn't feel comfortable, and didn't make sense at first, but was still necessary. Because without that separation, without that clearing, there would be no space for what is meant to come next. And what's coming next is not meant to fit into what you had before. It's meant to replace it with something that aligns more clearly with where you're going now. And this is exactly why you are seeing this now. Not when everything was falling apart, not when you were in the middle of confusion, but right at the point where things are beginning to come together, even if you don't fully recognize it yet. There is a difference between experiencing something and understanding it, and what you're stepping into now is the understanding. Heaven is often described as revealing clarity only when a person has moved far enough through the process to actually receive it, and that's where you are now. You've already gone through the part that felt uncertain, the part that felt unstable, and now you're standing at the moment where things start to make sense. You might still have questions. You might still feel like not everything is fully resolved, but there is a shift happening in how you see everything that occurred. Instead of just remembering the loss or the confusion, you're starting to notice the patterns, the timing, the way certain things happened in a specific order. That awareness is not random. It's the beginning of clarity. And clarity doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, piece by piece, until you can finally see the full picture without forcing it. There's also a reason this awareness didn't come earlier. If you had understood everything while it was happening, you wouldn't have moved the way you needed to move. You might have held on longer to things that were meant to leave, or resisted changes that needed to happen. But now, because you've already experienced it, you're in a position to recognize it without trying to control it. And that changes everything. Because when you stop trying to force understanding, it begins to come naturally. This is also why this moment feels different. There's a subtle sense that something is shifting, even if it's not fully visible yet. You might feel more aware, more reflective, or even more still than usual. That stillness is not emptiness, it's space. Space where clarity can actually form. Most people rush through moments like this, distracting themselves before they fully understand what's happening. But if you stay present, if you allow yourself to actually process what you've been through, you begin to see it differently. Even Jesus Christ is often described as emphasizing awareness and understanding at key moments, not just action. Because understanding is what allows everything else to align. Without it, change feels random. With it, change feels purposeful. And right now, you are moving from one to the other. This is why it's important not to dismiss this moment or treat it like something insignificant. Because this is the point where everything begins to connect. The past, the changes, the losses, they start to form a pattern instead of feeling like separate events. And once that pattern becomes clear, you no longer see yourself as someone who went through something confusing. You start to see yourself as someone who moved through a process that had direction, even if it didn't feel that way at the time. So don't rush past this. Don't go back into distraction or doubt. Because this is the moment where awareness turns into understanding. And understanding is what prepares you for what comes next. Now this is the point where everything that once felt scattered begins to come together in a way you can finally recognize. Because what's ahead of you is not another phase of confusion. It's the reveal. Not a sudden, overwhelming change all at once, but a clear unfolding where you begin to see exactly why things had to happen the way they did. What once looked like loss starts to show its purpose, and what once felt like endings begins to look more like preparation. Heaven is often described as revealing outcomes only when a person is ready to understand them. And right now, you are stepping into that readiness, whether you fully realize it or not. You're going to start noticing that things make sense in a way they didn't before. Situations that once felt unfair begin to reveal their role in redirecting you. People who left or changed begin to make more sense in terms of timing rather than just emotion. And paths that closed begin to show you what they were protecting you from or preventing you from stepping into too early. This kind of clarity doesn't arrive loudly. It settles in gradually until one day you realize you're no longer questioning everything the way you used to. That shift in perspective is the beginning of the turning point. At the same time, something new begins to open in your life, and this is where the real change becomes visible. Not because it replaces everything instantly, but because it fits in a way that what you had before didn't. There's a difference between forcing something to work and something naturally aligning. And what's coming toward you now carries that sense of alignment. It feels more stable, more clear, and more connected to who you are now, not who you were before everything changed. And that difference is important because it shows that you're not just returning to where you were. You're moving into something that actually fits better. Even Jesus Christ is often described as emphasizing that transformation leads to renewal, not just restoration of the past. And that's exactly what you're stepping into. This is not about rebuilding what broke. It's about stepping into something that didn't exist for you before. Something that required those previous layers to fall away so that it could actually take shape. And once it begins to appear, you'll understand why it couldn't have happened earlier. You may also notice that your reactions begin to change. Things that once triggered doubt or fear no longer have the same effect. Decisions become clearer, and you don't feel as pulled in different directions as you did before. That's because you're no longer standing in uncertainty, you're standing in awareness, and awareness changes how you move. It removes hesitation and replaces it with understanding, which naturally leads to more confident action. What's important now is that you don't go back into questioning everything the way you did before, because the phase of confusion has already passed. You've moved through it, even if it didn't feel like progress at the time. And now, what's ahead is not meant to be approached with the same mindset that kept you stuck in that in-between space. It's meant to be approached with the understanding that things are finally aligning, even if they are still unfolding, step by step. So this is your turning point, not because everything suddenly becomes perfect, but because everything begins to make sense. The breakdown, the separation, the delays, they all connect into a direction that is now becoming visible. And as that direction becomes clearer, so does your path forward. This is where you stop looking back, trying to understand what went wrong, and start looking ahead, recognizing what is finally going right.